Thanks for joining, everybody. So for today on the webinar, we're looking at roughly around sort of 30 minutes, maybe a little bit over, a little bit under. We'll see how we go. I'd love to keep the engagement going as well, so please ask questions in the chat. If you specifically send questions into the Q&A, so I've got colleagues as well that will help answer that, direct potentially any kind of questions to myself if needed. And yeah, let's get started. So the important thing in terms of this particular discussion, I want to talk about the state of pen testing. A little bit about me. So I've been with Pentera nearly 5 years now. So manage a team across EMEA and UK as well in terms of the platform, the solution that we deliver, working with a very talented team. And we work with a lot of enterprise organizations in terms of helping them understand their attack surface. We'll talk a little bit about what Pentera does as well. I'm sure a lot of you know. If some of you don't know, we'll sort of cover that base as well, just to add some more color. But yeah, this is me. So working very closely with our customers in terms of looking at security validation, looking at threat exposure, looking at the ability to be able to identify critical risk. Right, that's what we do. But we want to talk about pen testing, the state of pen testing in the UK. Right, what does that look like? And so this is part of a much broader survey, right, that we did with senior execs, CISOs, globally, right? So in the US and other regions as well. So 100 of those were in the UK. That we just spoke to, representing large enterprise organizations. This was carried out at the end of last year. We do this every year, right? So this is an annual survey. We look at the kind of trends, right? What do budgets look like? What are the kind of challenges that execs are facing, and where is the security stack looking like in terms of investment, but also looking at the threat landscape, right? And what are the drivers, and where is that investment going? What are the kind of strategic elements to that? This is, I guess, we can relate to a lot of the conversations that we have with prospects and with customers as well, and helping them shape their cybersecurity strategy. Right. So what did we find out? Right. So we looked at things like budgets, right? What are the kind of challenges around budgets? Where is money being spent? What are the kind of things that are being allocated? And what does that look like in terms of, I guess, year on year change? Right. So overall, right, spending is on the rise. We're seeing annual IT security budgets increasing. We can see a breakdown of what those numbers look like. We've got an average number. When we say increase, right, we're seeing generally overall there is an increase, right? Budgets are growing, right? Does that really having an impact in terms of better security posture, right? Is it helping to prevent attacks? Is it giving organizations the real change or improvement that they want? I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat as well. It's great. So my colleague Rich has just said hi as well. So please do engage with the chat. I'm really pleased to have you all here to join, right? But even better if you can ask questions. By the way, at the end, I'll also give you an opportunity to come meet us, right? Talk to us, reach out to us. We're happy to engage, and you might have more deeper questions, right, and things that you want to get into based off of this discussion. So we're happy to have that one-to-one as well. Right. So overall, budgets are growing, right? Is it making an impact? Are we really seeing the change that we want to? Enterprises spending, right, on security, right, in terms of annual pen testing, that number is also increasing, right? So there is more pen testing happening. It's what are the drivers for that, right? Typically, we see things like insurance providers, compliance, usual things, right? In order to do business, right, now you need to be able to tick certain boxes. Is it really providing value in terms of true threat exposure? Is it really helping to understand where critical risk is? Is it moving the needle, right, in terms of security posture? That's a question. It's an open-ended question. Okay, so in terms of overall increase in budget, right, we see that annual increase in budget going up. And if we look at those overall budgets, I think this is really a sort of repeat of that. So we just move on to, let's make sure I'm on the right. So yeah, so that's kind of in summary really around the increase. I think one thing I want to just talk about in terms of budget is one thing that we see a lot across enterprise organizations is the ability to justify the budget to the board, right? There are challenges in showing like, you know what, our security, a state of security investment is not in a healthy place, right? We know there are obvious issues, but there's no evidence sort of driven approach, right? Or there's no let's say, appetite from the board to invest. They've already bought or invested in controls that should help, right? But there's still gaps, and it becomes really difficult to justify more investment when you know there are gaps until something bad happens, right? And this is unfortunately insight in the world that we work in. We're in this kind of conundrum where if nothing bad has happened, then surely we're okay, right? And we don't need to invest in more. There is that challenge, and unfortunately, unless there's a breach, there's an attack. It doesn't really helping in terms of increasing budget or increasing spend to improve the things that you know are wrong, right? It's just a ticking time bomb. It's waiting to happen, but you can't justify it until that happens. That's unfortunate, right? And that's because sometimes that's the situation some organizations are in. Right. So, in terms of the security stack, what are we talking about, right? Overall, we know that a security stacks is more complex, right? The infrastructure that we're looking at defending is more complex. The different tooling that needs to be invested in to cover all of those different things is a myriad of things that you need to do. So how do you keep visibility of that? If we talk about infrastructure now, we're talking about hybrid environments, right? That can be on-prem, cloud. We're talking about other third-party systems. If we talk about third-party risk as well, some of the technology stack permeates into third-party world, I guess, in terms of dependencies, applications, access, including people and all those kind of things. So there's a growing attack surface, and then we talk about the external footprint, equally important from the outside in. Right, Pentera for us, for example, we don't just look at assessing the internal; we look at the external footprint as well. That complexity means that we're delivering more to our customers where through applications, through portals, through access, through sharing data, through integration, all those things. So naturally our attack surface is complex. So we've got an increase in terms of the number of solutions that compounds that in terms of the infrastructure and the solutions that we need. Number of solutions overall going up for most of the survey respondents. And then we're looking at to be able to meet the expanding attack surface, right? The number of security solutions overall as a number there, we can see that increase or growth. And then the other driver here, right, to talk about is cyber insurance, right? There is, I guess, a remit, right, or a diktat from cyber insurers to be able to adopt certain technologies, to be able to carry out certain best practices, to be able to follow certain remediation actions or remediation actions. There may be gaps, right? Depends on how thorough they are. Tend to be quite granular these days in terms of some of the requirements that they need you to fulfill. That equally could help in terms of reducing that cyber insurance, right? If an organization carries out X, Y, Z. But in terms of adopting technology, it's certainly a driver from an insurance perspective. I would say probably the thing that's I would add to that we're seeing as well is compliance, right? So from a need to do business with third parties, with organizations, with suppliers, with customers, there is a need also to adopt certain technologies, certain best practices. So cyber insurance providing yeah, as a driver for that increase overall, we can see that number of organizations are following the recommendations. some maybe not so, right? But overall respondents are reporting a positive uptick. Right. Okay. So moving on to the next, in terms of prioritizing critical alerts, right? How many alerts do you typically see, right? Within a data environment, there is a danger of alert fatigue. There's certainly, from our respondents, the number of alerts, there's a big uptick. If you've got more solutions that you're adopting, then naturally you're going to see more alerts, right? Perhaps the correlation, some of the maturity around the integration of those alerts and having a more joined up story is something you're working towards, right? Everybody's working towards that utopia even of a single pane of glass, being able to correlate events, to be able to convict let's say, suspicious behavior on the network or against your assets or devices or even employees, naturally you're going to see a lot of alerts. So that prioritization becomes really important. If you're seeing more alerts, there's kind of the trend that we're going to see. Right. So just to overall talk about, some of the sort of attack landscape, if you like, right, with being able to see fewer breaches. Does it really equate to that? Is it really moving the needle in terms of reducing the number of attacks? Overall, not as it seems, right? So big shocker, right? We're investing more, we're spending more, and that there is certainly more, a more complex attack surface and more complex solution in place or solutions in place. But overall, over the last couple of years, the number of attacks has grown, right? And we're seeing this across the board, right? Not just in the UK, but across the globe. I would say, and especially North America. As well, overall attacks are increasing, and that's only going to accelerate. Well, important probably ingredient to add to that is now AI has now potentially empowered attackers, right? To be able to craft more interesting attacks, to be able to have more research capability. And we're kind of at the cusp of that. It's the beginning of that journey, I guess, as adoption starts to accelerate, not just through organizations that are adopting to leverage that, but attackers are going to be adopting it and leveraging it to be able to build malware, to be able to look at delivery mechanisms, social engineering. And then we've got a whole new attack surface around some of the AI technologies that are being exposed, right, internally and externally, especially around sensitive data. So that's only going to increase. Or eventually, a lot of organizations are going to see some sort of cyber attack, right? In some cases, it's going to be devastating. It's going to be crippling, and we've seen a lot of cases of that. In some cases, organizations have been more resilient and being able to bounce back, right? It's all about that strategy. How are they prioritizing what they fix, and I guess dampening the effect of a cyber attack. Ultimately, it's about reducing the impact of an attack, right? That's what we really want to aim for. Right. So in terms of the disruption and the impact, what did that actually result in, right? And so, we're just covering what I talked about, really, right? Downtime, access to sensitive data. Unfortunately, if we talk about access to sensitive data, we've seen the whole fallout with Google, right, and the Salesforce data, and then some of that data being reused it to further attacks into SalesLoft and other systems, other ecosystems. So especially from a third party risk perspective, it's a real concern, right, about any kind of data that might allow attackers to gain information about users, about accounts, and allow them to pivot into other third party systems that contain important data as well. In most cases, there is going to be an impact of some sort. And so again, we're seeing an increase in the number of attacks, and we're seeing some of the impact being quite bad as well. What are threats spread across, right? So, what are the typical, I guess, in terms of the landscape, what are the typical technology stacks that a lot of the organizations that responded, what are they looking at in terms of compromise? A growing attack surface is obviously because of that integration piece around the web, APIs, external web-facing assets. Again, this is important to look at the external attack surface, or to look at that sort of growing cloud capability, to look at those integrations into third-party, public, private cloud. Right? Again, an important attack surface for attackers, right? If they can see something on the outside, of course, it's going to attract the bad guys to try and find secrets, credentials. Those are all quick wins for attackers. And so naturally, we're seeing that reflected in the response on the survey. Not to mention that, some of that traditional infrastructure is still in place as well. We did see recently the SharePoint stuff with external facing assets that again expose sensitive data through the vulnerability exploit of the SharePoint technologies allowed attackers to potentially run quite devastating attacks there. Okay, so proactive testing, all right, it's getting better, right? There is certainly an increase that we saw earlier in terms of, investment in cyber, investment in pen testing, all of those kind of things. But is it really moving the needle, as we talked about? Is it really helping in terms of that change that's needed to reduce it? Well, the numbers say no, right? We're seeing more attacks. It's not really helping. The rise of software-based pen testing, right? This is where we come into that arena when we talk about automated pen testing. What kind of testing are you doing? And I think important sort of point to ask here is like, are you investing in any kind of pen testing today? Are you doing traditional pen testing, or even looking at autonomous pen testing? Feel free to reach out. Where are you today in terms of that journey? Unfortunately, as we talked about, traditional pen testing can be a compliance driven, could be driven by insurance, could be driven by a tick box to be able to do business. Is it really giving you an idea of the true threat exposure, the real attack surface? Is it telling you what attackers potentially could leverage? Maybe not. Maybe sometimes it is, right? Depends on how much money you're investing in that. The more money you're investing in it, perhaps the better the picture might be. Not always, but usually the idea is that you're paying for more quality. But then if we talk about software-based pen testing, right, don't think of this as a replacement for traditional pen testing. It has its place, right? The human-led testing is important, and it certainly helps in terms of getting to the things that a software-based solution might not be able to. When we talk about things like OT networks, when we talk about more application-driven testing to look at proprietary systems that have their own nuances, and you still need that human-led piece. But where software-based testing, and when we talk about automated pen testing, where it really helps is giving you that scale, that visibility across the organization, to be able to look at empowering the teams that are doing manual pen testing to find things like shadow IT, right? So it's impossible to be in an organization with 5,000, 10,000 devices or employees, to be able to reach everywhere and to understand all of the gaps across different technology stacks. And we talked about, the growing attack surface and the complexity of the number of solutions. Well, it just takes some of those solutions to be misconfigured or turned off, and this is where manual pen testing can fail, right? Because it doesn't scale. You can't run it every day. It's a point in time, and you can't get that true visibility across time, and so that becomes really important. Where are you on that journey in terms of adopting some sort of software-based pen testing to supplement the human-led stuff, right? And it's important to say that it's about empowering and scaling. It's not about replacing, right? And there will always be a human element that's needed to look at the remediation, to look at the guidance that comes out of that, and the kind of decisions, the strategic element. What's important is that we talked about cybersecurity budgets and investment, and what if security software-based, pen testing, or automated security validation, as we call it. What if that could be used to drive some of those strategic investments? So if you're using a software-based solution to look at testing lateral movement, naturally that might lead to better network segmentation because you've identified that actually lateral movement is a big problem, and you're seeing that through some of the automation, through some of the tests where you're landing a test on network B from network A. It shows that there might be gaps. There's visibility and doors that are open, and so naturally you want to then look at how do you make that better? How do you lock down some of those important devices, whether it relates to any kind of important data or the crown jewels. So there is absolutely a room for doing more testing, for getting better visibility, and running those tests more often. Okay, so in terms of where do you direct the some of the testing? What are the kind of things that you look at? Obviously, we saw previously the web sort of facing assets, APIs, applications. We look at from an external attack surface, we look at misconfiguration of applications, we look at infrastructure. We also look at shadow IT in terms of, let's say, subdomain takeover. Being a particular issue. So over the recent years, Pentera expanded into looking at that external attack surface and very quickly, at scale and speed, identify critical risk or identify assets. Usually assets that have been forgotten about, right? Legacy stuff that might have been there from a time before. And so it's important to understand which of those assets are important to you. What does that attack surface look like? And where do you prioritize? What you might prioritize might be a little bit different. And so this is kind of that alignment with what you perceived against what actually might be a problem. Right. And so we talk about the strategic element. There are a lot of different use cases for testing, right? It's not just about compliance, as we've talked about. It's not just about being able to do business. It's about preventing attacks, right? It's about that true threat exposure. From a compliance perspective, right, there is a threat of fines, right, of regulatory side of things, things that you need to adhere to. But then there's also that important reputational aspect, right? And being able to make sure that you're getting the best out of your security tools, the best out of your investment. You're spending more on all those security tools. Are you really getting the best value, bang for buck? Is that EDR solution doing what it's meant to say? Or is it in a certain niche environment? It doesn't work in a certain part of your legacy estate. It doesn't do what it's meant to say on the tin. Or worst case, right? And I've worked for a long time with customers around best practices in configuring their security stack, EDR especially. And 9 times out of 10, we found that it's simply been turned off, right? Or the configuration wasn't optimal. And in that case, in that particular breach or in that particular attack, it failed, right? And so this is where that continuous testing capability becomes important. That doesn't scale from a traditional pen testing perspective. It doesn't scale. It doesn't give you the ability to bring somebody in every day or every week to be able to test those kind of things. These are quick wins when it comes to software-based testing or security validation. Right. Okay. So I want to be able to just move along a little bit, and please, if you found this useful, do provide us with feedback afterwards. We'd like to hear any areas that resonated with you and continue that discussion. So when we talk about operationalizing the findings, the remediation, right? A lot of organizations struggle with the remediation aspect, right? Do you sit on it and look at, and in terms of resources to get the right people to look at it? Overall, right, a lot of organizations are going to try and prioritize the important stuff straight away, but over time, those results become stale. And so how I'm going to relate this to some of the things we do around continuous pen testing is that you want continuous visibility of what's important, because what might be important yesterday might change very quickly. Attack surfaces are very dynamic, as we talked about, right? Especially with the play with cloud and AI now. So sometimes the actual issue that was discovered is no longer there, right? It's been completely replaced, but you might have introduced something completely new. So there may be some credentials that have been exposed as part of an update, a change. So you need to be able to validate continuously. But the important thing here is that we see that in a lot of cases, the operationalizing side is happening. You want real insights into what's important. So any kind of report needs to reflect that. Right. Okay. So we talk about, I guess the frequency of testing. That's really important because again, for obvious reasons that we just talked about earlier, changing IT landscape, you want to be able to revalidate changes in the environment. You want to be able to make sure that what you have today is actually secure, not what you had yesterday. And so the more often you test, the more visibility you're going to get, the more you're going to get around trends. And so, especially if you have reports that give you some sort of trend analysis, you can see emerging issues around the way, let's say, network segmentation is operating, or around how the EDR is detecting things. There may be that there is a growing trend. The serviceability of some of your security control stacks might come into question if you're continuously seeing problems, the same problems appear, you're fixing them, and then they reappear again, right? Is there an inherent design issue with that solution? We talk about tech bake-offs, and something that we haven't really talked about in terms of pen testing. How often would you be using it to test different solutions and test if they're fit for purpose, right? And so if you have the ability to test more often, you're able to test if those security controls are lapsing in some way. Are they still relevant? Is there something better out there? And especially when you start to look at things like XDR and reporting and response and incident response, again, is the right kind of telemetry being seen by the SOC team, right? Do they get a joined up story of what's going on, or is there a lot of gaps in the story? And so what's actually happening in terms of testing your attack surface, you're finding that actually the detection and response is lacking, and you're not really getting the kind of visibility that you want. So I've thrown a lot of different ideas and use cases right around testing, and it's important that we show that. Okay, so the other compounding factor here is, and we come across this all the time, is that just the backlog of work. So humans don't scale, right? And internally, if you have people that are involved in testing, they can't, get to every single system, every single control, and they can't test everything that needs to be looked at from a security posture perspective. And so they're going to naturally prioritize in terms of their resource, their time, right? And they're going to be looking at the things that perhaps are creating them with the most noise. But it doesn't mean that necessarily the things that might be the most critical risk are gonna ever be looked at, because we just don't know about them, right? It's perceived versus reality of what might be there as an attack surface. So it's important, right, to have that in mind, in that you need to empower the human side of pen testing through automated security validation, through regular pen testing. It's just not scalable, right, on its current trajectory. Right. Okay. Yeah. So I think I wanted to finish with this kind of final thought, really, thinking like an attacker, right? And so this is what we do in terms of Pentera, looking at the attacker's perspective, and it's about a shift from being reactive to being proactive. And this is really important, right? Because if you can get ahead of the curve, the fallout is going to be naturally is going to be less, right? You don't want to be cleaning up at the end of an attack. You'd rather that you'd prevented it in the first place, and you'd identified it 6 months ago. And so that becomes really powerful in terms of that continuous visibility, that testing. And so I just want to leave that last thought, really, right? What are you doing in terms of being more proactive? That is the game changer ultimately, right? To be able to reduce the fallout of an attack and all of the repercussions around that. And so this is what we do every day at Pentera. Happy to talk to you guys. Please reach out, book a demo with us, right? And we happily come along on site, have a meeting. We'd love to even look at a proof of concept. So what we call a 1 day challenge, be able to showcase the platform. You can run it for yourselves, right? So no obligation as we enter into a conversation around kind of the solution and what we do at Pentera. We can actually help you run it in your own environment and show you what it would look like if you wanted to adopt that approach and get that visibility, all right, and sort of look at some of the challenges and the problems that you face. Now, in this short webinar, I couldn't possibly have covered all of the different use cases and the problems that we solve, but you've got hopefully a really good idea and a flavor of what we do. So please scan that QR code, reach out to us, have a discussion. Happy to start a conversation. The important thing is that we will share this webinar with you afterwards as well, so you have something to look back at. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of the week even. Take care. Bye.